Hey, it's Dr. Stephen Franco from How to USMLE. So I want to spend a little time explaining to you how to USMLE is different and how I know it's going to take your score and maximize it compared to all those other USMLE resources out there. So before I go into it, I want to just talk quickly about my story. Now, if you want my full story, you can go to another one of the videos or to my blog and read about it, but I'll just say very quickly, before I got into medical school, I was not a great student. I had below a 3.0 science GPA. My MCAT score was well below average to get into medical school. And in general, even if you go back further, my SAT score to get into university wasn't really that great. It was slightly above average, wasn't really that great. So I've never been a naturally great test taker or a naturally fast reader or anything like that. Now, I wanted to be a doctor. I knew I wanted to go to medical school. But when I was accepted, they looked at me and they said, hey, we look at these grades, we look at these, if you want to get in, you're going to have to repeat a lot of these courses in what we call a post-bac for one semester and show us, hey, can you get this done? Can you do it? And you're going to have to take these courses, which are essentially medical school level courses in a high university level, and you're going to have to get almost a 4.0 or almost a perfect score in each class. Now, it was at that point that I told myself, hey, I'm kind of smart, but I'm not really going to be much smarter than the people around me. But I wonder if there's something I can do to sort of get that advantage, to sort of do better. And I started to look into as much learning strategy as I could. I started to read about how the mind works, psychology, how the subconscious communicates with the conscious mind. What does our brain go through when we're actually answering a long multi-stem question? And is there anything that you can do to make sure that when you study something, it sticks in your mind more than other ways? So the only luxury I'd say I would have is I didn't have these set-in study techniques like other students might have had because I wasn't that great of a student. So I was really starting from zero. And I took that and I made a technique that worked so well. So I got that straight A's in that post-bac course. And then when I got into medical school, I was able to get straight A's from day one. And I was able to get in the 250s and 260s on my USMLE. Now, when all this was happening, I was looking at a lot of my friends in medical school, and I was seeing them taking these formal courses, getting tutors, paying really so much money, thousands of dollars for this, and then coming to me and be like, hey, Steven, I'm not really doing that well. I just took a practice test and I'm really not doing well. Or worst case, they tell me after the fact, like, hey, I failed or I barely passed. Like, what can I do? And I would look at them and I would say, hey, like, this is what I use, and this is based on a lot of science, and I'm pretty sure it's going to work for you, and I think you should try it. And all of my friends and a lot of the students that I then eventually had, they tried it and it worked really well for them, much better than these sort of formal courses, which I knew because I knew based on a lot of my readings and a lot of my research, which came down to tens or even hundreds of reviews, and also looking at a lot of other factors, that these sort of things, they tend to not really work that well when you're talking about formal courses. Even when you're talking about tutoring, if it's not done correctly, it can actually tend to not work that well. And it was at that point that I started to take on a lot of students. I started to teach a lot of my friends first, but then take on a lot of students, tutor a lot of people, and I noticed that they were doing really well. They were taking these sort of principles that I knew that took me from a disaster to someone who was doing, just spectacular, and people really thought, wow, you're so naturally gifted, but I knew I wasn't. And I started teaching it to them, and then they started doing really well. And that's when How to USMLE sort of came about. Then I started my residency, and obviously time was a little bit more of a factor, so I took a little bit of time off. I just did some tutoring here and there. But then I wanted to make sure I brought it back, because I just think it's a shame that so many people try and approach the USMLE, and it means so much to their life. It means so much for them getting a residency, and yet they fall behind. Even putting their faith and their money behind a lot of things, they still fall way behind, right? So what's different about us, right? So unlike maybe a big company that gives you here are all the resources, which by the way are not the best resources, because I know the best resources. I've looked into the best resources. I've seen, like I said, hundreds of reviews, looked at a lot of things, as much research as any person can do, and I know what the best resources are. I know pretty equivocally what the best resources are. So they'll give you a bunch of resources that they've made that they want to sell you, and they'll say, hey, use this. They won't really give you all that much guidance on how to use it. Maybe they'll give you some rigid schedule. Maybe they'll say sit down for this class, but they won't really give you the true guidance of how should you be using and extracting information in a way that is proven to get the most out of them. And that's the difference with How to USMLE. We are not a resource-based company. I'm not going to say, hey, here's my book. I don't care if there's this book that's really good. You're not going to use that. You're going to use my book. I don't do that. I know what the best resources are, and I'm going to recommend them to you. So what we start out with is by telling you all the mistakes and problems that students make when they're approaching USMLE. That's the first thing that we go through and the first thing that we say so you can avoid that. Because these things that a lot of students do and they don't realize it's actually killing their score. It's actually hurting their score. So that's the first thing we go through. Then we go through scheduling and time. Time is your #1 resource when going through USMLE. It's something that's so underrated because you want to make sure that you're not just spending a bunch of time doing the wrong stuff. You want to make sure that all of the time that you're putting in is going to have a great outcome in your score, right? Because if you're spending you could study till you're blue in the face. You could study for years and years and years, but if you're not putting in your time efficiently and correctly, then your score is not going to reflect it. So the first thing we go over is how to study correctly, how to make the best use of your time, right? Then we take a different approach for each schedule. After we explain the resources, we're going to explain to you how you're supposed to be using the schedule that we're going to give you. Now the difference is we give you what we call a block schedule. It's adjustable based on your lifestyle. If you say, I can only study 20 hours a week because I have to work in my home country, okay, then you can adjust this very easily to see how much you want to study per week. But if you're saying, hey, I'm in crunch time and I need to be studying 60 hours a week, okay, you can easily adjust this to 60 hours a week. We tell you how much time you should be investing in each resource because we know that amount of time will affect your score proportionally to how much time you put in. You don't want to be spending tons of time on one resource that's not going to give you those extra points on the test. It doesn't make sense. And we tell you exactly how much time to be putting in. So then, depending on how far away your test is, depending on when you're going to be taking that test, we've got different schedules for that. So if you've got your test and you're a year away, why would you use the same exact schedule and the same exact approach who has the test in 6 weeks? It really doesn't make much sense. You have that extra time. You can use it efficiently to get a very different approach, potentially a different outcome, right? So then we're going to go over the actual study principles and study techniques that I learned, that I painstakingly learned through. I can't even comprehend how many hours it took me to figure this stuff out. A lot of it was just not easily accessible. It really had to go through a ton of books, and I finally found it. And we're going to share with you exactly how to extract information from our resources using these techniques. Then we're going to go through each of the techniques, the study techniques that we have, and the techniques involving your mind to explain how we're using those to maximal effect and to your maximal effect on USMLE. And then we're going to go through the questions themselves. How do you go break down these questions? Because when you're taking a test with these long stems, with lots of things going on, it can be really difficult. And I'm sure you know to just get those answers quickly and move on and be confident. And be confident what your answer is and move on, right? But we're going to show you how to do that. We're going to show you how to break down the questions. Then we're going to show you how to become 100% confident in what your answer is, or very confident, I should say, much more confident in what your answers are, so you don't have to second guess yourself, so you don't have to waste a ton of time. Then we're going to show you how to extract information in a way that's maximally efficient, right? How to extract information in a way where you won't forget it, right? Where you'll understand it as best as you possibly can, and you can come away just doing as best as you possibly can. So this is not a passive thing. You're going to have to put in the time. You're going to have to put in the work. You will. I mean, if you don't want to put in the work, then don't bother. This is going to be something that's difficult. But the difference is, if you put in the work, if you put in the time, if you do what you're supposed to be doing, we say you do what you're supposed to be doing, then you will notice your score is going to go up, and you will notice that you're able to maximize your score. And I always say maximize because unlike a lot of other companies that say, hey, we'll give you a 260, no problem. I'm always honest with students and say, hey, I can't get everybody a 260. Not everyone is a naturally good enough test taker to get a 260, but what I will do is maximize your score and make sure that you get a good enough score. And trust me, if you're a medical student, if you're someone who can get into medical school, you can do very well in this exam. Right? So don't doubt yourself for a second. Don't doubt yourself for a second. But we will work to maximize your score. So that's the How to USMLE difference. That's how we approach it. That's how we do it. And trust me when I say you'll be able to go a long way to getting that score you want and getting that residency you want if you go with us.